Across deserts, libraries, shipwrecks, and ruined observatories, historians keep finding objects that refuse to fit the story we're told. 5 artifacts, 5 eras, one small mark keeps appearing where it shouldn't. What if these aren't isolated puzzles, but pieces of the same hidden thread? In the next 15 minutes, we will treat the past like a puzzle and follow a tiny symbol that might change how we see connections across centuries. Welcome to the Phantom Thread, a 15-minute forensic journey through history's strangest repeats. Today's method is simple. Present the evidence, describe scholarly consensus, and ask what best explains a repeated mark found on manuscripts, machines, ceramics, landscapes, and metalwork. Along the way, I will flag what experts say, what is speculative, and what would be needed to turn speculation into stronger proof. Expect specific details, folio numbers, machining irregularities, survey notes, because details are where the case lives. Listen for the small spiral, the coil mark, and notice how it behaves across different materials. In a monastery cellar long sealed from light, a collector found a bound codex filled with an unlabeled script. Scholars argued for generations. Is this cipher an invented language or a hoax? Modern imaging revealed layers of corrections and hand pressure, consistent with an authentic scribal hand, rather than a forger's flourish. Of special interest are marginal annotations and repeated small glyphs placed near plant drawings and schematic devices. The glyph, a tight coil with a short tail, appears 20 times across multiple folios, usually near corrections or emphatic notes. An important detail: the coil appears where the scribe corrected or emphasized content, always oriented the same way. That pattern reduces the chance of random doodling. If it's a conventional sign within the scribe's circle, we should expect to find it on other codices from the same workshop. Yet exhaustive catalog searches so far have turned up nothing obvious. That absence is itself puzzling. Either the workshop was small and ephemeral, or the sign traveled beyond surviving documentary traces.
From a shipwreck, originally thought to be a merchant vessel, conservators recovered a compact mechanism composed of interlocking bronze gears, fine teeth, and a central spindle. Microscopy revealed tool marks and filing techniques precise enough to suggest a specialized workshop. Inside, a recessed plate, where 2 components met, someone engraved an almost invisible coil mark with a sharp punch, forced into metal, not simply scratched. Remarkably, the mark is tucked away in a place that would be hidden from users, only visible when the mechanism was disassembled.
Conservators compared the punch depth and pattern to other known maker's marks from the region and found no match. That raises possibilities. Either this mark identifies a previously unknown workshop lineage, or it denotes a cross-cultural artisan network that shared tools and symbols beyond political borders. The combination of sophisticated machining and a hidden maker's mark suggests purposeful craft identity rather than random ornament. In an arid dig, a fired clay disc emerged from a sealed context. The disc's symbols spiral inward in tight rings. Scholars catalogued the signs, proposed parallels to nearby scripts, and tested hypotheses about ritual use. Embedded within the spiral, at regular intervals, is the coil glyph, not as an afterthought, but integrated into the stamping sequence. The presence of the coil inside a stamped sequence suggests intentional inclusion, possibly a structural or semantic marker, like punctuation, an operator, or a symbolic tag marking sections of content. Microscopic residues in recessed symbols yielded trace organics used for AMS calibration, which placed the disk's last firing in a pre-modern window, reducing the likelihood of modern contamination. The coil sits baked into the clay, surviving floods and fires. and persisting exactly where the original maker placed it. That survival argues against recent addition and strengthens the argument for an ancient, purposeful sign. Surveyors flying over a high plateau recorded a geometric geoglyph with startling precision. Segments aligned to astronomical bearings and platforms cut to specific angles. At one terminus, a shallow spiral carved into stone mirrors the coil glyph's curvature. Unlike a scratched doodle, this spiral was created by removing topsoil and leveling underlying rock to reveal a contrasting surface. Photogrammetry shows the spiral's proportions match the manuscript and metal impressions when scaled and rotated. Local oral histories mention a place of marking and passage, but such testimonies were collected centuries after the geoglyph's creation. That temporal gap complicates direct attribution, yet, when combined with the symbol's recurrence across other media, the site becomes another piece in the pattern. A motif visible on the ground at landscape scale suggests cultural importance, perhaps ritual or wayfinding, and indicates the symbol can function both as an intimate sign and a public statement.
A conservator dusting an old collection rediscovered a slender rod that had sat misidentified for decades. The rod bears consistent stamped impressions along its length, each impression a tiny coil mark. The uniform depth and spacing suggest the impressions were made with a repeating punch, perhaps working on multiple objects in a workshop. Chemical assays on microscopic flakes revealed an alloying method that included a small proportion of an electrum-like alloy, a technique known in distant regions but not common locally. Provenance is imperfect. The rod passed through private collections and lost labels. Yet the physical evidence, stamping method, alloy trace, and where consistent with extended use, argues it is not a modern forgery casually stamped by a collector. The rod's pattern suggests industrial repetition, the same mark stamped in sequence as part of production or inventory marking.
Lay these 5 objects side by side. The manuscript's coil appears 12 times. The mechanism hides a microscopic punch. The clay disc stamps the coil in its syntax. The geoglyph carves it into the landscape. The rod repeats it as a series of stamps. What pattern emerges? First, the coil is media agnostic. Ink, metal, clay, earth, and stamped metal. Second, its morphology is consistent. A tight spiral with a short tail, even after scaling and rotation. Third, the contexts vary. Religious, mechanical, ritual, landscape scale, and production line. Now consider how symbols travel. Trade routes, pilgrim paths, and artisan itineraries have moved ideas for millennia. Craftsmen often apprenticed across regions and carried tools and punches. Religious pilgrims carried talismans. Merchants exchanged not just goods, but design motifs and workshop practices. If the coil was a workshop mark, it could have spread as artisans migrated. If it was a ritual emblem, it could have been adopted into local material culture in many guises. However, there are counter-constraints. The coil's precision suggests a template or punch, rather than random invention. Independently arriving at the same tight coil with identical proportions is possible, but less likely, especially when the mark appears in hidden maker spaces and in formal stamped sequences. That cumulative strangeness pushes the balance toward transmission across networks, whether trade, craft, or religious.
To move from speculation to stronger inference, historians apply tests. Here are 3 working hypotheses, and the kinds of evidence that would favor each one. A.
Convergent symbolism, independent invention. Evidence for this would include a wide variety of visually similar but proportionally different coil forms appearing in unconnected strata and cultures, plus contextual explanations showing the coil served different meanings. For instance, agricultural fertility in one area and a cosmological motif in another. If we found many distinct coil variants emerging at different times without overlap, convergence becomes plausible. B. Transmission via networks. Symbols spread through trade, pilgrimage, or itinerant craftsmen. Supporting evidence would include matching tool marks across artifacts traceable to the same punch or die, trade route intersection sites showing simultaneous presence of related objects, contemporary records mentioning a workshop or guild, or metallurgical fingerprints that match across finds. A matching chemical signature or a common clay source would be a smoking gun for movement of objects or molds. C. Deliberate appropriation or later addition. Marks added by later users, restorers, or copyists. Evidence here includes inconsistency in patina between the mark and the surrounding surface, signs of modern tooling, or archival records noting restorations. If a mark was added centuries later to increase an object's prestige or market value, microscopic analysis and documentation often reveal it. Careful researchers will stress limits. Radiocarbon windows can overlap widely. Surface finds can be intrusive. Collections often lack reliable provenance, and restorers sometimes added marks or catalog numbers that confuse later analysis. The mind's pattern seeking can produce false positives. A coil is visually simple, and by selectively grouping cases, we risk confirmation bias. The correct scholarly response is humility. Gather more data, seek independent dating, test metallurgical signatures against known sources, and never substitute narrative charm for scientific rigor. Imagine a craftsman, call him Marin, trained in a coastal workshop. He carries a punch and finishes instruments for navigation. When political strife closes his shop, Marin travels with his tools. He works briefly in a port city, stamps a rod, then moves inland where a monastery commissions a binding, and he traces a coil in the margin as a discreet signature. Years later, a pilgrim takes the manuscript to a desert shrine, where a potter sees the spiral and adopts it into a clay stamping tool. Over generations, that single motif migrates from workshop to shrine to field, shifting material and meaning, but carrying an echo of origin. Conservators can test tool marks under scanning electron microscopes, revealing microstriations unique to a punch. Isotopic analysis of metal or clay can point to raw material sources. Thermoluminescence can date the last firing of ceramics. Cross-referencing these scientific results with documentary evidence, shipping logs, guild regulations, or monastery inventories, provides the strongest path forward. Without such cross-checks, we risk arguing from attractive patterns rather than robust evidence. If you work in archives or collections, here are useful things to look for. High-resolution macro photographs of marks, SEM images of punch microstriation, XRF or ICP-MS data of alloy composition, thermoluminescence dates on ceramics, and any catalog entries mentioning repair or restoration. Even a well-documented list of object movements between collections can overturn or confirm hypotheses. Whether the coil proves to be a quirky coincidence or the trace of a forgotten chain of craftsmen and pilgrims, the real lesson is methodological. Small marks matter. They are often the crumbs historians use to follow lost movements of people, ideas, and techniques. If you love history for the way it surprises us, then this tiny spiral is a perfect example. Modest in appearance, monumental in implication. Look closely, ask for the data, insist on tests, share evidence responsibly, and history will reveal new connections. Thank you for listening.
This has been Timelens. If history leaves you with more questions than answers, subscribe, because the past is never really past.